Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and it's not Spawn year. It is day
64
of my comic review video day calendar, and as promised yesterday, we're doing another Batman book. It's all Batman books and all different titles for this entire month of March, Bat March, and as promised yesterday, we're doing a Batman comic that is in black and white, and as some of you guys might have guessed, the title is Batman Black and White. Number one, this is from 2013. And Jason, this is the second volume of Black and White. There are 5 Black and White volumes, believe it or not.
Wow.
All of this kind of anthology concept where these are basically vignette books with different short stories, kind of a who's who, a showcase of some of the best writers and artists, some of the most well-known and beloved creators that have worked on Batman or are in the comic space and want to do Batman stories. But I think most of, if not all, these guys have done Batman stuff before.
Like half of them.
Just half of them?
Some of them is their first time doing a Batman story. Like, there was a guy that,
Oh, does it say that?
wanted to do a Batman story forever, and then he finally got to do it.
Oh, okay, cool. So I was right in the first place. I don't know if that's true of the volume before this, but anyway, as Jason's kind of alluding to, there are really nice write-ups about each of the writers and artists if you're not familiar with them, and we won't go through, real specifically about each writer and artist, but of course we'll credit them all. And most of these guys are folks that I'm familiar with from one thing or another. Jason, the first volume had guys like Bruce Timm and Howard Chaykin and Neil Gaiman, and there are definitely some creators here that are as well known as those guys, and some of them real classic writers, some of them a lot more recent guys. One of them is a guy that is a lot more famous now, or at least one of them, than he was when this started, and I'll bring him up a little bit later. But anyway, these were backup features in the Batman Gotham Knights book. You remember that ongoing, Jason?
Yeah.
And which I think is also kind of an anthology thing, but this is, again, real short 8-10 page stories, which, Jason, I sometimes get frustrated with, because I think it's hard enough to do a really good one and done beginning, middle to end story in just 22 pages in a comic book. To whittle it down to a 8-10 page short story. Like, short fiction is kind of where I live. It's one of my favorite mediums. So much harder to do with pictures.
Yeah, definitely.
A lot fewer words to work with, and the visual storytelling has to carry it just as much, if not more, but then you've only got so much space to do any kind of action.
Yeah.
So that can be really difficult. But anyway, the original volume of this was done in, again, anthology singles that came out all on their own, and this one is backup features, as is the third volume. And Jason, there's a 4th and a 5th volume out now. This goes all the way up to 2021, was the most recent volume. And I haven't looked at any of those, so I'm kind of curious about them.
They're probably bad.
You think so?
Yeah.
Well, how do you feel about these? We've got 5 stories.
5 stories.
And overall, did you enjoy them? Did you think they were kind of throwaway? Did you think there was kind of a range of quality? How did you feel about them?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the stories. Like, some of them were really good that I really liked, and they did a good job like putting them into like 10 pages, and then there were others that were like not great, and like, what is happening, and like, I don't know, we're just kind of blah. And then
there's one in particular we'll mention that is really incoherent,
makes no sense.
Somehow less incoherent than what that guy usually does. We'll get into all that here in a second. We'll go through these story by story and give you a very quick breakdown and synopsis and how we felt about each of them. We won't get even as in-depth as I usually do with these because there's 5 of them. But so you're saying kind of range of quality.
Yeah.
Did you like this enough to try to want to read more stuff like this? Because I know you haven't really read comic fiction that's this short before.
Yeah, I would read something like that.
Or at least much. I guess there have been a couple of Boom Power Rangers one-shots that did that I think you've read.
Yes.
But I think that's maybe the only stuff you've really done that with.
Yeah.
Okay, the first story we have here, Jason, and by the way, we are still on the road, obviously, like literally on the road. We're sitting at a gas station right now on our way to meet my uncle for dinner, and we had just a few minutes to get this knocked out before we get back on the road and go down to see him in Ames, Iowa. We're in Iowa right now. We're about 25 minutes outside of the city of Ames, and we have just enough time to break these down. So let's do that, Jason. We've only got about 13 minutes. So we've got a story at the beginning here. What's it called, Jason? You really like this title a lot.
It's called Don't Know Where, Don't Know When. And the reason I like it is because on the first page, Robin says, "See you there and then."
That's really fun.
I think that's really cool.
What do you think of the cover, by the way?
Oh yeah, I like that cover.
It's really cool. It's kind of haunting.
It's the worst story of the thing, but it's a cool cover.
Yeah, I think so too. We'll get to who writes and draws that in a little bit, because I think it's the only like writer artist story in here, is it not?
Yeah, I think so.
Anyway, so what happens? Let's go ahead and break down or mention who the story credits. So story by Chip Kidd and art by Michael Cho. And again, you get these write-ups at the end of, or in different places with these. So at the end of the first story, you get a write-up about who wrote and drew this, and then right after that, you get a write-up for the next one, and then it does that again. I'll just go ahead and point out who the next one is, but we're going to talk about a Neal Adams story, and whenever, in a little bit, whenever Neal Adams draws and writes, it tends to be absolutely incoherent nonsense, but always entertaining in its way. Again, this is 2013. Neal Adams just passed away, a couple of years ago now?
Yeah.
I think. And Jason met Neal Adams a couple of times. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that?
A couple times, yeah.
Going to cons, and you kind of hit it off with him. Neal Adams really liked my son. Anyway, but rest in peace, Neal Adams, and sorry to make fun of your writing, but the man is a very strange writer, but of course one of the greatest comics artists who ever lived. He's a little bit like Todd McFarlane.
Yeah.
In that he's one of my favorite artists and one of the strangest, most baffling writers. So yeah, I've already spoiled that, but we'll go ahead and talk about this first story, Don't Know Where, Don't Know When. And Jason, give us a real brief synopsis, would you, about what happens in this story?
This is about like Robin going out and trying to find, he was supposed to meet Batman at this one place, and then he lost him, and then Superman goes to help him find him, and then that's basically it.
And what has happened to Batman?
Joker teleported him to Korea.
Yeah, Joker is a teleporter. Batman goes, you've got a ray gun. What are you going to do with that ray gun? And he goes, no, it's a teleport. And it works. Yeah, it's really funny. This one is, and I think probably, 2 or 3 of these are this way, where it's a lot more about the art than it is about the story.
Yeah.
And it's this kind of throwback to mostly, the kind of 40s and 50s Batman, and mostly Dick Sprang. And there is a Sprang reference in this third dialogue balloon on the first page, maybe on the roof of the Sprang building. That's because we're doing Dick Sprang throwback art, and we should probably real quick back off and talk about the black and whiteness of it all. Why
is it all black and white?
Well, because it's, I think, a couple of reasons. It's kind of a tradition to do kind of pulpy black and white artwork, especially when you do throwback to Golden Age stuff, because a lot of Indian underground and even maybe some mainstream stuff, certainly in newspaper art and all of that, was in black and white. And Batman goes back to early pulp detective fiction. That's where it starts, and a lot of that stuff certainly was in black and white and was noir, because the contrast with the black and white thematically fits with the stories that are being told there, of course, but it's also just really moody. And I think Batman lives really nicely in that world of black and white. I think a lot of great Batman stories are like really minimal in their color, and the blacks really pop out. Famously, Batman the Animated Series was drawn on black in the first place because the shadows are so important, and because you can save a lot of time if you start on black. So why not just tell some stories with Batman in black and white? I kind of wish we did more of this. I think it'd be nice to have a Batman black and white ongoing that isn't anthology, but is an ongoing story. Maybe a hard-boiled detective kind of thing. Maybe a neo-noir or something that even is set in the 40s.
Yeah.
That harkens back to noir. And so the stories in this that I can't imagine being in color are the more noir-esque stories, particularly the last one.
Yeah.
There is a ventriloquist story at the end of this that I think is the most appropriate for the lack of color with this.
Yeah.
But I like this Dick Sprang looking stuff also in black and white. But some of this you could kind of imagine colored. But what I like about this book artistically and all of this, the art is more interesting than story, I think, even with the better stories. But they're all drawn with black and white, of course, in mind.
Yeah.
So you're not really thinking, it doesn't look like a coloring book. It doesn't make you go, I really want to take, magic colored pencils or markers to this whole thing.
Yeah.
And it's very Sin City in that way. So there's still, even with the somewhat kind of goofier throwback stuff, there's still a bit of a noirish component to it, certainly. What is the second story about Jason?
I don't know.
We're going to get into...
It's about Batman sometimes just randomly turn into a zombie, and then...
This is the Neal Adams story that is absolutely... Hopefully you guys can see this okay, and we're not getting blotted out by the sun. But I'm sorry, what were you saying, Jason?
Yeah, basically sometimes randomly Batman turns into a zombie, I think, is what is happening. And he goes to some prison and talks to the prisoners there, and that's basically everything that happens.
Did you miss the point of the ending?
I don't...
Okay, so when I say this is incomprehensible, a lot of the writing is baffling, where Neal Adams just has characters say things with no context that are just random and don't seem to fit with anything. The story itself, by the time you get the explanation at the end as to what's really happening, is actually a lot more coherent than a lot of other things the couple of other things I've read from Neal Adams. He had a Batman story. I forget what that was called. He had a 12-issue Batman maxi and a 12-issue Superman maxi, both of which were just absolute nutball crazy land. And I keep wanting to review those, but I don't know if I want to have to read them because they make my brain explode. Just that anybody would sit down and think to write that way. But so it sounds like maybe I've jogged your memory.
Yeah,
what happens at the end of this?
Basically, it turns out that was a dream.
Yes. And so Batman wakes up from this dream where he is a zombie, where Bruce Wayne wakes up from a dream where Batman is a zombie, and he's going around being completely ineffectual at helping people with more basic, regular social problems, like horrible, terrible things, but not the kinds of things that just punching a bad guy with your fist or finding a lot of clues and solving a mystery are going to fix.
Yeah.
And it is Neil Gaiman, pardon me, I don't mean to throw Neil Gaiman under the bus. This is Neal Adams, I think in the most heavy-handed way possible, making some major like social and political points, using Batman as a mouthpiece for that. And the metaphor is interesting, but it's such an obvious, I don't know, the way he does it is just really obvious in your face. And maybe if he had a little bit more time, it wouldn't be written that way, but I kind of think it would. And
yeah,
because there's not a whole lot of story to unpack here. It's not like he's stuck with 10 pages, so he's telling this really complex story that's real truncated down. It's simply, he wants to make a statement about how the system in like the justice system and the monetary system, et cetera, in America. This gets very political. In America is kind of broken and is set up for the 1% versus the rest of us. And so like Jason said, you got Batman going to a prison where there are prisoners who did the crime, certainly, but were unfairly not prosecuted. Like I said, they should be prosecuted, but their sentence was unfair. Like the punishment didn't fit the crime. So somebody who has like drug possession, but it was just like an ounce of marijuana or something. That was the one that immediately jumped out at me, and I was like, okay, it's really obvious what you're doing, and that's like the immediate go-to that people mention whenever we talk about people being, unfairly put in prison for too long, is the ounce of marijuana. And then you have a lady who is being evicted from her house, and again, Batman is just standing around as a zombie, not able to do anything about any of this. And there's no explanation as to how he became a zombie, because that's not the point, and the whole thing is a dream. So the metaphor is, when it comes to these kinds of issues, Batman is... And it's not the standard thing we do with zombies as a metaphor. It's that Batman is cold and dead and unemotional and ineffectual for these kinds of things. You can't intimidate your way out of these kinds of issues. We've got to change hearts and minds somehow. And that's the thing I like about it. It just, the writing itself reads really heavy-handed. And so when Bruce wakes up, he decides immediately that he's going to start trying to use his money and influence as Bruce Wayne to help solve these kinds of problems. And it maybe gets a little bit at the criticism that some people have with Batman as a character, that he could solve a lot of the problems he's trying to solve if he would just throw money at it and use his resources that way instead of just going out and hitting bad guys and fighting crime. Yeah. And some people don't like Batman because of that, where it's like somehow it's like socially incorrect to have a character that does that. But you have to understand the psychology of Batman and who the character is. And why he feels the need to do that, because some of it, the internal conflict with Batman is always about his trying to figure out if he's more about vengeance than he is justice. So how much of it is he has to do this for himself, and how much of it is he really wants to actually help people. And we could argue all day long about whether what he's doing at the street level is more or less helpful than if he just threw money at stuff, because it kind of reads a little bit like Neal Adams is saying he can change hearts and minds better with money than setting an example on the street. And I don't know if I agree with that. So again, just a really political story. And like I said, I like the metaphor with the Batman zombie.
Yeah, I didn't catch that, honestly.
But now that I've said it, do you think I'm right? That's what it's about?
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I took over there, but I had to talk about the thematic material with that.
To say about that, because I just didn't really know what it meant or anything.
Do you like it more after I talked about it, or?
Yeah. It's still weird though.
And it isn't really in your face, I think. Okay, we'll go through the rest of these pretty briefly. So we have a story called Harley and Ivy, which you'd think might be a Bruce Timm thing or a Paul Dini thing, but it's not. This is Maris Wicks, who is a female writer that I don't recognize from anything else. Drawn for Ad House Books, Tugboat Press, and SpongeBob Comics. So probably a lot of kids and all ages stuff. And then Joe Quinones. I've never known if that's how his name is pronounced, but I know I've seen his stuff before.
Yeah.
Teen Titans Go and Wednesday Comics. Okay, so also some creator-owned things. Or, I'm sorry, he's got creator-owned things, but also some all-ages stuff. Okay, Jason, sorry. Tell us briefly about... We are already out of time, but we're going to finish this up, okay? I talked too much about the Neal Adams story. Tell us a little bit about Harley and Ivy.
Yeah, so this is about... Oh, yeah, this
hamburgers.
is about hamburgers. This is about Harley, this is about, Harley Quinn, getting a hamburger and then finding out that it's drugged, and so she can't eat it, and so she goes to Poison Ivy, and she makes a funny joke in the car, and
What was the joke in the car?
Oh.
Oh, look at me! I can turn stuff into plants! Yeah, that's pretty great. This is a real classic old school Harley Quinn.
Yeah.
Which in 2013 you really have to appreciate.
Yeah. But basically, if we find out that Poison Ivy actually isn't drugging the hamburgers, and that it's actually this, like, scientist guy.
Who used her research.
Yeah, who used her research, and then she makes a, whatever it's called.
An antidote.
An antidote, and then she gives him the antidote, and for some reason
But
it turns him fat or something.
No, so I looked this over again, and now I understand what's going on. For a second, I was really confused about that panel, and I went back and looked at it. So basically, the idea is this scientist is trying to use Poison Ivy's research to create the perfect veggie burger. This is a really funny idea, and it doesn't work out, and when you eat it, it turns you into a plant. It does kind of the Alcide effect from the tick, and I had, by the way, I had a hard time not thinking that the idea from this, because this reads so Batman the Animated Series, that the idea for this maybe didn't come from the Jokerfish episode, Laughing Fish, and I think that might be Harley Quinn's first appearance.
I think it is.
Maybe second, I can't remember. But anyway, there's a joke in there about how maybe the Joker should have used cattle instead of hamburgers. Instead of fish, and done Joker burgers.
Oh.
And I wondered if that might be if that might be where this idea came from. But instead of making it, because I thought it was going to be hamburgers that make you crack up and give you the Joker toxin.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be Poison Ivy inspired. And anyway, so this guy decides to frame Poison Ivy because everybody already thinks that it's her fault, and then thinks that he can blackmail her into giving him an antidote. And she's already worked one up, and she actually does give it to him, but then he has already had, Harley Quinn forces him to eat the hamburger, and I guess, no, she wants him to turn into a plant.
Yeah.
Because she wants revenge on him. I don't know, I guess he got the antidote from them somehow, or maybe like when they weren't looking he grabbed it. I wasn't sure about that whole thing.
Yeah.
But then he takes it, and I guess it's too late. She goes, "Oh, it's too late, Batman." Batman jumps in.
Yeah.
And then it turns out it really is too late, because then he turns into a big fat plant person.
Yeah.
So not a super deep story or anything, but the kind of thing you can get done in 10 pages.
Yeah.
And reads like an episode of a cartoon show.
Yeah.
It's kind of paced that way, I think.
Yeah.
That one's fun.
Yeah, that one's fun. That's probably my second favorite.
This next one I won't have a lot to say about except for art. This is written by John Arcudi, who did stuff like Mask, Gen 13, BPRD, and then Sean Murphy, who is a much, much bigger name now, and in Batman. I immediately, because I forgot what his name was, immediately looking at this art, I knew, oh, this is the guy who draws Batman White Knight. And White Knight is so popular, it's its own universe now, and they're making more of them. There's at least 2 sequels, I think, maybe even spin-offs, and I've reviewed the first short story, but I haven't read the first miniseries, but I haven't read past that. I think Murphy must be, if not a gearhead, obsessed with Batmobiles, because so this one is called Driven, and by the way, this calls Sean Murphy in his write-up the industry's newest rock star, because he did Joe the Barbarian, which I've read at least part of, and Punk Rock Jesus, which is really well liked, and I've never read. But I thought it was really interesting immediately seeing a Batmobile story from him, because one of the things I really like in White Knight is he draws like every Batmobile you've ever heard of or you've ever seen in that book, and especially screen stuff. There's this huge panel of just all the screen cars.
Wow.
in the Batcave, and then they like drag race. If memory serves, there's a whole scene where you get all the Batmobiles on the road at once.
That's awesome.
It's been a long time since I've read it. I reviewed it on Batmosphere with Dan's when he and I were doing that show, and it's been a while, so I may be remembering part of that wrong, but I thought all the cars came out at some point. Anyway, this is simple. What happens in this one, Jason?
It's basically switching between Batman telling Alfred why he needs to change out the engine in the Batmobile and like fight in cars.
Yeah, he has...
doesn't it like turn out that Batman's just wanting to do things, so he changes it out and he doesn't actually need to change it out?
Yeah, it's like Batman's being a gearhead.
Yeah.
He said, this is a little bit of a departure from what I'm used to with the Batmobile. Instead of having a mechanic that they bring in that just does that, or having Alfred be the mechanic, it's Bruce himself says, I've got all these parts from different places. They're really rare, and the only person that can do work on the Batmobile is me. And it's like, this is how he's having his fun.
Yeah.
It's like maybe the only time he's happy is when he's working on the Batmobile. It seems to be this version of it, and he's just really enjoying himself, like putting together his perfect hot rod, messing around with the Batmobile. And like Jason said, it's intercut with a car chase with Batman and Roxy Rocket, of all people. I think it's Roxy Rocket.
Yeah, it is Roxy Rocket.
Her name is, I don't think, ever mentioned.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
okay, I missed that. But it looks like her, and I only know her from the new Batman Adventures. And yeah, he smashes up the fender and thinks that there must be something else wrong inside of the Batmobile just because of how hard he drove it, and how crazy he was with the Batmobile that night. And his computer tells him, no, everything's fine, it's 100%. He's like, no, it can't be 100%. I want to work on my car. And that's kind of the whole idea. Another fun... I'm liking some of these better talking about them, by the way.
Yeah.
But another fun story that's not really about too much, except, I guess, with Batman Psychologist just saying he is still a person. He does have to get his kicks somewhere, but he has to pretend like it's work.
Yeah.
I can relate to that. But that's really fun.
This one's okay. Like, this one's probably my second least favorite of them.
Yeah, I didn't like it much just looking at it, but as we're talking about it, it is kind of a fun, cute idea. And another thing that feels like it could be an episode of maybe animated series.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these stories have almost specifically the animated series version of the character in mind.
Yeah.
Okay, and then finally, we've got to get going. Finally, Head Games.
Head Games.
Head Games!
This is about the ventriloquist, and it's about Batman is trying to find out who murdered a bunch of people, and it turns out to be the ventriloquist, except he doesn't have Scarface. He's trying to fight Scarface.
Written by the great Howard Mackie, with art by Chris Samney, both guys that I've looked at quite a bit with different things. Samney did some Daredevil and Shadow, and Mackie has a major run on Ghost Rider and Spider-Man and lots of other things. This one's great. This is a...
yeah, this one's my favorite.
This is my favorite too. This is a very character-driven story. This is the one that I was most surprised was able to be worked into 8 or 10 pages.
Yeah.
Because I feel like you could blow this one out, but it just really utilizes its real estate well.
Yeah.
So...
and there's so many panels on a page at once.
Yeah, and it needs that. It kind of looks like Sin City that way.
Yeah.
And this is the most Sin City in noir, esque of these. But I maybe missed a tiny bit of your synopsis, Jason. Did you talk about what the ventriloquist is after?
Yeah, he's after Scarface.
Yeah, so...
because people are, messing with Scarface.
Yeah.
Killing Scarface.
Rival mobsters have... There's this whole group of rival mobsters who are new in the city, and Batman says are too ambitious for their level of ability. And they're, like you said, they think that Wesker is stupid and that his whole thing with his puppet is dumb, and so they take Scarface, and from Wesker's perspective, they murder him.
Yeah.
And the idea here seems to be that if you put Wesker in a corner and you take away his other persona, because of course he believes that Scarface is real and gives him his orders and he needs him, he is scarier than he even is with the Scarface persona intact.
Yeah.
Because what he does is he takes a baby and he says, if I don't get Scarface back, I'm going to murder this baby.
Yeah.
And when Batman presents him with the head of Scarface and reveals that all the pieces are still around and he can put them back together, because all these mobsters have taken them as trophies, Scarface says, ventriloquist, you dope, Wesker, we don't hurt children.
Yeah.
And it makes Wesker even scarier than Scarface.
Yeah.
I love that. And then the character arc for Batman, this is the one where he most has a real arc, and weirdly it kind of gets to the same place that the Neil Adams story does, but more naturally, and you see a real, arc.
Yeah.
Where at the end, he decides that, again, these social problems that he can help solve as Bruce Wayne are as important as these street level things.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what he learns through the course of this story. But that's the one that I like the best, and I would most recommend people read, even if you didn't look at the rest of this.
Yeah. Yeah, that one, I think that one is the one that most feels like an episode.
Yeah. But darker than that show was, of course.
Yeah.
Maybe the kind of thing that could have been done in the Batman Adventures comic based on that show.
Yeah.
Which we reviewed an issue of the other day.
We did do that.
Well, Jason, thanks for talking to me about these.
Yeah.
We went longer than I wanted to, which is always the case. But we had 5 stories we had to talk about.
Yeah.
So that was your favorite?
Yeah.
And what was your least favorite? The zombie story?
The zombie story, yeah. Although
the art was
I did
cool.
like it better than, when you started talking about it, but I don't know, it's still my least favorite. And then Driven is my second least favorite. And then
The hamburger story.
the first one is
Oh,
my
the first,
third.
yeah.
And then the hamburger one, and then the last one.
Oh, so the hamburger story is your second favorite?
Yeah.
Well, guys, thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I'll be back with another Batman book for you tomorrow, and a completely different title. Don't know what I'm doing yet, but I'll be back solo and back in the studio. Once again, appreciate you guys. I'm Captain Logan, and that was Jason. Jason, thanks for helping me do 3 of these in a row.
Yeah.
Happy reading, guys.